Welcome everyone on behalf of the Ridgefield Library. My name is Lori. I head up in Blackman. I work in the adult programs here at the library and organize some ARTalk series. There are some brochures in the back room. You can see our upcoming programs in 2023. This series is co-sponsored by the Ridgefield Guild of Artists and the Ridgefield Library. Today I have the pleasure of introducing our ARTalk speaker, Colleen. We'll talk about how digital tools can empower artists, art enthusiasts, creative communities, and businesses. Colleen is currently the new Ridgefield Arts Council Chair and has nearly a decade of experience in the global fine art market. She is also the Senior Vice President of Artnet, an online marketplace which provides art market data and analytics and a global news wire. At Artnet, Colleen manages a proprietary auctions business, oversees a global team and the facilitation of $30 million+ in sales, both for and contemporary art, prints and multiples, and photographs. She also oversees Artnet's gallery network, which features 250,000+ reviews from primary market galleries across the world. Prior to her work at Artnet, Colleen held roles at Christie's and the New York State Council on the Arts. She holds a BA with special honors from Artnet College and is a frequent speaker at CUNY Arts and Administration program. Will you please welcome Colleen Cash.
Thank you so much, Lori. Thank you to the Ridgefield Library and the dear Ridgefield Guild of Artists. My name is Colleen Cash, and it is a sincere pleasure to spend this afternoon with you, where we'll dive into a topic that I think we're all still figuring out. This is sort of history being written in real time, right? It's art, it's culture, it's digital, it's this hybrid world that we have necessarily found ourselves in. Maybe we've been thrust 10 years into the future because of the happenings of the last 2 years, and together we'll unpack that. I'd like to sort of share an overview of where we will go today. I'll give a brief introduction, a little bit about myself, and the way I wanted to break this down was in a few key pillars. Right, when we look at art and culture, if you break down that to sort of the basic building blocks of that DNA, you have your creators, you have your institutions, and you have your patrons. And we'll do a deep dive on each of those categories to help us understand, how we've done sort of business in each pillar and how we are now doing business in each pillar. We'll also do a little bit of a dive into Ridgefield. Right into the zip code we're all sitting into what has recently been designated Connecticut's first cultural district. And in my role as the chair of the Ridgefield Arts Council, I have a unique perspective into the work that is ongoing to continually fulfill that mission. And certainly this is a town that is art and culture, full stop. So we'll go there as well. I hope this is a dynamic and engaging conversation. We will absolutely have time and room for a Q&A at the end. There might be opportunity for us to chat while we traverse together as well. So just by way of further introduction, a little bit about me. So I am a relatively new Ridgefield resident, minted in 2021 with my fantastic husband and his 2 daughters. We moved here from the city, and that was a very calculated decision. I wanted to move to a town that was a destination in and of itself and not a means to an end. So it wasn't just about commuting timetables or distance to New York City, but it was about a town that had a pulse and a town that had offerings that were vibrant and dynamic, and Ridgefield ticked absolutely every single box. The Arts Council was actually the first group I made contact with before I even moved to Ridgefield. I had been in New York City for over a decade, going to school, building my career, living my life, and I was acutely aware of the fact that I was moving to a town and I knew nobody. So I did what one of the tools in my toolkit, I went to Google, and I said, okay, I'm moving to Ridgefield, I'm in the arts, let me put those search terms in and see what comes back. Lo and behold, it was the Arts Council. I made a phone call from my Upper West Side apartment, said, hi, I'm moving to Ridgefield, how can I get involved? And the rest is history. So it's been a really wonderful, just over a year with that organization, in a really pivotal time, I think, in our town's history, as art and culture, certainly following the pandemic, knock on wood, if we can even say following the pandemic. I know it's sort of Are we there? Are we not there? What an interesting time to be engaged with that sector in Ridgefield. In my professional life, I work in the fine art space. I've always been in sort of the private side of the fine art business, specifically in the secondary market. I've become a bit of an auctions expert. I am not a fine art specialist. I'm on the business side. And at Artnet, I run their auctions business and their gallery business, and I have the tremendous pleasure of connecting great art to great clients across the world every day. It's really a joy. I came from Christie, so I started in brick and mortar auctions, selling decorative arts of all things. So porcelain and silver and rugs and furniture, things you live with, which was a really interesting experience. Great way to cut your teeth in the industry. It's not the sexy stuff, it doesn't make headlines, but it's about 60% of any traditional auction house's book of business in a year. These are actual objects that you live with. I've also held positions in the New York State Council on the Arts, New York City Council, the New York Executive Chamber, so that was the governor's office. And I actually also had a stint, if you've been to Terminal B and you've admired any of the artwork, I had a hand in that RFP process. It was very interesting. I was working with the Office of the General Counsel on the redevelopment project, and no one knew how to contract for maintenance and management of a 256,000 square foot Sarah Z installation. And I sort of said, I think I know something about that. So the business of art has taken me in really some interesting twists and turns. I'm excited to share that with you all today. I'd be remiss not to mention that I come from an arts background myself. I was a theater person, I was a vocalist. That's still in so much of what I do. Auctions, certainly in the in-person world, is very performative. It's nothing but a show when you're behind a rostrum and you have an audience in front of you with paddles in their hand. I like to think in the online auction world we have a good share of drama as well, which we get to enjoy. And going back to my real roots, I went to Hunter College in the city, and refusing to be pigeonholed, I made my own major, which my mother to this day complains about because she has no idea how to explain to people what I studied. But I had a degree in special honors, and I studied actually at the Museum of Arts and Design. So I thought this was a sort of funny play on words, making mad, and that's the abbreviation for the Museum of Arts and Design. And I studied art, industry, and the ascension of craft. And I did a deep dive looking at the administrative history, the business management, even the real estate decisions made in this museum's life cycle that helped it go from a sort of obscure collecting category to the behemoth museum it is now in New York City's Columbus Circle. And how craft, again, my decorative arts background, chairs, furnitures, a Wendell Castle music stand, how that went from being an object of utility to an object that can exist in a white cube space and be lauded as a work of art in and of itself. So that's a bit about my background. An artist who works with artists, with collectors of art, with businesses of art. I found myself very much in that ecosystem in my personal life, in my professional life. And before we dive in, creators. Just some pointers about the general framework we're going to take here. Professionally, I live my life in the fine art world. You might see a bit of focus on that because that's what I know best. It's what I'm most fluent in. But I really tried to create a framework that was art agnostic. So we'll go through some sort of schemes and scheme it together. And I think, think of the art you know best. You'll be able to slot in the key players for each industry, for each category, etc. And on top of that, the market. So we talk about art, we talk about the institutions engaged with art, we talk about patrons. The market ends up being an important force for us at a macro level, especially when we tie the conversation back to Ridgefield at the end of our time together. So, we will continue to consider the market, not just the financial elements of art, but how it all comes together from the studio to a place where we are engaging with it and enjoying it as patrons and as institutions. So let's jump right in. As we knew it, and the only other sort of parameter for us to think about is, it's hard to not look at the pandemic as a major cataclysmic force in this digital evolution. There is no question, we were already living a hybrid world before the pandemic. We all had used Amazon, we were all buying tickets for Broadway on telecharge. No question, we had digital tools in our toolkits, as patrons, as institutions, and as creators. There is also no question that the past 2 years, again, pushed us far into a future that many in this industry in particular had not even begun to grapple with yet. So when we talk about the change in the past 2 years, it might feel pandemic focused, and necessarily it is, because it forced us to evolve much more quickly than perhaps the industries would have otherwise. But truly, I mean, we had always been in a hybrid world, but the last 2 years were particularly interesting and impactful in terms of how we all live our lives as consumers and creators and makers and lovers of art now. So with that in mind, I wanted us to look at and posit this idea of a sort of creator market life cycle, right? And let's talk about the creators. They are the reason why we're all here. And yet, particularly in this model, right, this as we knew it model, it's hard for the creator to exist in a vacuum. It's hard for the creator to, it has been historically, I should say, hard for the creator to create and do all of the other things that ultimately connect creator to institution to patron. So what does the creator do? What has the creator done? The creator works in spaces dedicated to their practice. You can look at this in any art. A musician has a studio. A painter has a studio. A writer has a writing desk, right? They have physical accoutrement that they create their art with, they practice their craft with. And historically, there have been fairly set boundaries sort of between the tools that they deploy versus the others in the cycle. Right, so we often think of, and this brings us a little bit further ahead to this tastemakers pool. I mean, how often have you heard the stories of the jazz musicians and their business managers? Or if you watch The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, you have the comedian and her manager. You have the artist and their gallerist, right? You have the writer and their publisher. There's this pairing that is consistent across categories, across industries, but is very consistent in this idea of art and institution that exists because we've sort of agreed that one has a specialty and expertise, a talent in one area, the creation, and the other can take that creation and can help bring it to market. And this is where the tastemaker comes in. And in this business, it's like being a horse trainer. They are in the business of picking winners and making winners. And that's the key there, making winners. Not everyone is a commercial success right out of the gate. Particularly in the gallery world, in the fine art market, there's a lot of work that goes into picking an artist, right? I mean, there are businesses, they'll go to the Yale MFA shows, the Hunter MFA shows, and they'll pick talent, and then they'll develop talent. And the development is a key piece, right? This is connecting the artist with additional trainings, workshops, even mentors that can help them create their craft and perfect their craft and grow into their craft. And it's also market making in the truest sense. It's connecting the art to potential commercial opportunity. And that's true across industries, right? So if you're a writer and you have an editor, or you are a musician and you have, even thinking about a radio DJ, these are tastemakers. In some way they're gatekeepers. In some way they are the first ones to give someone a shot, give someone a big break. And they're important because they are ultimately the connector between the art and the patron. And we acknowledge there's a lot of great art out there across categories that we don't get to see because the tastemaker, either they haven't had access to one or it hasn't reached us. But ultimately, as patrons, that's where we can then come in. So when we turn on the radio and a new song is surfaced to us, or when we are reading, the New Yorker magazine, and we read a latest review from a show that's opened, or a new book that's come out, we are all of a sudden given an opportunity to consume, right? And theoretically, in all of these examples, the tastemaker has had a role in surfacing that art to us. Publicists, the gallery listings, even openings. I mean, you think of all of these tools that have been in the toolkits of the tastemakers to get the art to us. And what do we do as patrons? We provide our support financially, in a community-driven way. We attend openings. We buy books. We go to museum shows. We might share that we've been somewhere on social media. We play an intimate role in this life cycle as well. And insofar as we continue to do so and we create a critical mass of interest, then come the arbiters of culture, right? This is where the New York Times bestseller list kicks in when something has become a bestseller, right? Or something has reached a pinnacle and all of a sudden has a museum exhibition. In the fine art world, that's a big deal. That becomes a very important part of an artist's life cycle. That's a you made it moment. We talk about provenance. You list the exhibitions you've been a part of as part of your provenance. What else is an arbiter of culture? Social media to some degree has become one. Sort of this moment where the art achieves a sort of level of exaltation. So you could sort of say it has reached it because it has had commercial success, or it has had zeitgeist success, right? It has made waves enough that it is now being written about. Even a bad review, you could say, ends up being an important part of an artist's life, right? Because it has driven someone to make comment on it. And I would argue that that is another arbitration of culture that helps to cement the idea of this market. And then, once something has sort of been arbitered by these arbiters of culture, then we have a market. Then all of a sudden, and this is now that next pivotal connection between bringing the creator rather back into the equation, the market can start to actually affect the art. You might see this in books, in the literary world, in the music world. All of a sudden, ticket sales drive what sort of art you're creating. Look at Lady Gaga as a very interesting example. Who she was when she was an NYU student, very different from who she was in her first tour and in her second and third and fourth and fifth and sixth tours. You get a sense of what your audience wants and you start to play to that audience. And that does actually affect the art you produce. And likewise, parties with vested interests, this is maybe a little particular to the fine art world, right? Maybe you were an early patron of an artist whose primary market, meaning sold at galleries or acquired from the artist's studio directly, has gone gangbusters. Now they're trading in the secondary market, meaning auction. You might be sitting on a bunch of paintings. It might behoove you as a patron to donate a work to a museum, right? It helps check. You have now created that moment of exaltation. And this is true across industries. There's a lot of levers here that kick in to help concretize this life cycle for a creator. And ultimately, we are all open to influence from that group on top of, behind us, across the cycle. They all speak to each other. And really, this is a model that we have known for hundreds and hundreds of years. Famously, the Medicis, right? And this is specific to the fine art world, but again, the idea of the patron. Donatello, Botticelli, Michelangelo, they had a hand in creating so many of these canonical artists that you cannot, they are inextricably laced to modern art history. And it really was, to a large degree, because of the patronage of a very wealthy family, a highly connected family, in a region that was, finger on the pulse, if not the pulse itself, of the cultural world as the world knew it. And they were responsible, not always with positive feedbacks, certainly from the artists, but to connecting the artists with new mentors. It was, I believe, Michelangelo who famously studied with, the best of the best, and he couldn't have accessed that education without patronage from a family like the Medicis, or without the commissions that they would bring to these artists, which meant sustenance financially, places to live, food. And this is true in the world today too. In the gallery world, those who work with artists are called artist liaisons. I've always thought their title is particularly interesting. It implies it's sort of more than a business manager. It's maybe a little more qualitative. And that's true, because oftentimes when you're supporting an artist, you're supporting them writ large. Parts of their lives, you're helping them travel to get that education, supplies. It's more than just buying the book or buying the artwork, and the Medicis did mint that model. But where are we today? The digital world has been really interesting, I think, where creators are concerned, in that it has burst open their toolkit to include so much more than the typewriter, the paintbrush, the guitar, these instruments of art itself. All of a sudden, you have artists who are using social media, who are using payment processing platforms, who are creating their own websites, who are managing their own businesses. And this is a change. And I think it certainly started pre-pandemic, right? I mean, if anyone has gone to an art fair or a craft fair and paid with Stripe or Square, those little plugins on someone's cell phone, how incredible to give the artist a way to facilitate a sale on their own. But likewise, how incredible to now have Instagram, where an artist can be their own tastemaker. And I think that's the biggest shift we've seen in the past couple of years where creators are concerned, is that the creator has a role in every part of this process now, where they used to be a bit more ring-fenced, and you really did require that outside expertise. More and more, these buckets are starting to collapse into each other. And the tastemakers, they are still in the business of picking and creating winners, but there's a lot more competition, and it's coming from within. So it's not just, David's Werner Major Gallery versus Gauguin. It's those galleries versus the artists, because social media has given them a platform to say, hey, this is who I am as an artist. I don't need you anymore or your gallery space to connect me to patrons. I have the World Wide Web. I mean, that's a pretty powerful thing. The patrons have also, I think our access to art has exploded. I mean, we are consuming in so many different methodologies across so many different categories now. I actually think our definition of art has widened in the past couple of years. If you look at even the categories that auction houses are selling now, and it's not just for commercial gain, it's because these things have entered the canon. Sneakers. You might laugh. Yes, there's a huge commercial market behind them, but there's also a large portion of the world that believes these are works of art. And they collect them as such, and they take care of them as such. And I think we are now, as patrons, and now our direct relationship to the artist has strengthened to the point that we are also market makers. And the arbiters of culture, because of the power the creator, the patron is taking on, we are now arbiters of culture. Which then, when you look at market demands, it can make for very volatile and very fickle markets. And that's a good thing. It can be a dangerous thing, particularly if you're an artist who goes long into one of these trends. We'll talk about NFTs in a minute. I know the crypto world certainly came onto everyone's radar last year as a great example of this for many reasons. But it really has been net empowering. And I want to share one example that I think is particularly interesting. This is an artist by the name of Lucian Smith. He's a young artist, mid-30s. He was represented by some of the best galleries. Started out with small galleries, got major gallery representation. And in 2015, he said, I'm done with you guys. They were not doing what he wanted from them, which was all of the things we talked about in that first cycle, right? He wanted a museum show. And the levers they were playing, maybe it was a slow and steady wins the race sort of mentality, building the patron group, building the primary market, sort of squeezing the primary market for all it's worth to build that secondary market, the very historical steps that one goes to become an established blue chip fine artist. And he said, I'm so over this. And he actually quit all of his gallery representations. And in 2020, he secured himself his first museum show at the Parish Art Museum out in the Hamptons on the Island. And he was savvy. He invited a bunch of who's who from the East End, he had a studio out there, to his studio, and he took out a couple of artworks. And the director of the Parish Art Museum was invited, she attended, and the relationship was built between museum director and artist. That's unusual, but it's actually a trend that's very much on the rise. When you operate in a model like this, that means this artist gets a lot more of the sale price for a work of art than they would have had they been working with a gallerist. And it also allows them to control the spigot. Do they want to produce a lot this year? Do they want to take a year in sabbatical? Do they want to explore something? Do they want to double down on a theme they've been doing for years before? It allows them to decide what from the market is going to make them move, and it allows them to go out there and conquer their own goals. So like I said, he is sort of a beacon in this model, in the fine art space. He's been very successful. He embarks on projects he wants to embark on. When you look at the acting world, there's a few artists who have arrived at that level, and I think we look at them because they have arrived at that level. It makes me think of Daniel Day-Lewis or Meryl Streep, right? They sort of have pick of the litter in terms of projects. They don't have to go out and take every job they get. But the digital world and the ability to connect and advocate for yourself has created a different playing field for artists, I think across categories. It also makes me think of the literary world, self-publishing. Now, this is not a new concept. Beatrix Potter self-published, right? I mean, this has been going on for hundreds of years. But Amazon, say what you will about the company, Kindle, the ability to consume digitally, the low cost, not having to do a print run of 1,000 books to get going, right? And maybe even more to save money because economies of scale. It's cheap for the writer, it's cheap for the consumer, but the richness of the content is still very much there. And when the digital age has empowered really all industries to take the bull by the horn, so to speak, and create your own markets. And NFTs. I think there's been no digital, I almost want to call it a supernova, that's entered the space that has brought empowerment to a larger group of people than non-fungible tokens. We are not going to get into the crypto side of this. This is not a blockchain conversation. I really just want to talk about what NFTs did from a medium perspective, from the artist perspective, and the community perspective. So for those who might not be familiar, last year, in the incredible bull market that was cryptocurrency, Ethereum, non-fungible tokens, there was a rise of this new art form. And principally, and the NFTs I want to discuss today, these are sort of digital art that happen to be what's called minted on the blockchain. I'm less interested right now in these things that are sort of collectibles or the brand partnerships you've seen rise with NFTs, like Adidas has done a bunch and Balenciaga. I want to talk about the digital art that was created largely by millennial or Gen Z artists across the world with a very low barrier to entry. All you needed was a Wi-Fi connection. This is a group of artists who are heavily, BIPOC, artists of color, huge demographic of LGBTQIA artists. Their tools, their communities are Twitter and Reddit and Clubhouse and Telegram and all of these apps that, I find them clogging my phone, but for this group, this is their lifeblood. And in the last year, taking to GIFs, those little moving videos we might see on the internet, memes, these codified jokes that end up with sort of different punchlines. You might see them as you scroll through Facebook or Instagram or any of these social media apps, videos, digital clothing that you can wear in video games, and of course this term, the metaverse. This has been the medium that a new generation has been experimenting with. And cryptocurrency aside, what an amazing thing to see so many young artists of color, diverse artists, become artists. And I think that story it's been drowned out to some degree because of the whole crypto side of things, but it really is incredible. And there are some real, truisms here that should not be taken lightly, right? Which is new media has been experimented with forever. And look at what happened when abstract art hit the market. Look at what happened when pop art hit the market. And now it's what everyone wants on their walls, and that is blue chip. The definition is living and breathing, and will continue to live and breathe. Truly, NFTs minted hundreds of thousands of new artists across the globe. For art enthusiasts out there, we should be heralding that. That's a good thing. Whether they're working on Photoshop or they're doing a charcoal drawing, at least they're creating something. And in the NFT space, this is very interesting. The community is akin to provenance, right? So if you're buying something at auction, and this artwork had exhibited in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, it's pretty solid provenance. And there's sort of a clear hierarchy where you know what sort of provenance you're looking for. In the NFT space, provenance is linked to the depth and richness of a community following that artist, or even that series of NFTs. And that's really interesting when we look back at our model and we see ourselves as patrons and the increasing role we take on. Well, in this space, the patrons are the provenance. So if anyone is thinking of buying an NFT, my only advice would be, if you're looking for any sort of resale value, is look at the community. How deep is the community? How many followers does it have on Twitter? What's its Reddit dynamic like? Those are the new markers that this space is telling us to look at, and it's because of the patrons. There are no tastemakers, the patrons are the tastemakers. And that's a very empowering thing that the hybrid world has necessarily ushered in. This is one NFT that I wanted to share with you. This is by a married couple, Jennifer and Kevin McCoy. I know Kevin personally. He actually minted the first NFT in 2014. He is a trained fine artist who has always used digital as his medium. So he was, sort of software engineer, fine artist, and he was always coding things, and that was his medium. And this NFT is a generative NFT, which means it moves over time. You're looking at a still shot of it now. But it actually, over time, can create up to 20 sides, so it moves sort of like a living, breathing, I don't want to say an amoeba, it's more geometric than that. But you can get the sense of how it moves. And it will do so over a 3-year period. And it will also create grayscale copies of itself along the way, which can become their own works of art. So now this digital world is creating works of art that can create works of art. Now it's a little existential. But it goes to show that there is more in this category or behind this category than what people are thinking is selling, JPEGs. It is an interesting one, and it certainly has taught me a lot. And it has set some institutions on their head. So a bit of a segue here. We've talked about creators. We've talked about the cycles that creators engage with and are a part of. Let's talk about the institutions. I called in this overview the banquet halls of art, right, and culture. These are the groups that launch it for us. They build it for us. They create opportunities for us to consume. And this is a model that I think is very universal to any art business, art institution, a nonprofit, a for-profit. These are your libraries, your theaters, your auction houses, your galleries, your performing arts studios, your camps for, with educational programming for students. Each organization has a mission and a strategy. And of course, if you're familiar with the nonprofit world, the mission is an extremely important part of an organization's really reason for being and underpinning infrastructure, but equally so for a for-profit business. The mission is what the branding and the marketing and the connection to clients all comes from. And that's really the why. The reason d'etre. Why are we here? What is my unique proposition? What are we offering to the world? Further to that, you have the what. What are we going to do with our mission? What programming might we offer? What partnerships might we engage with to bring our mission to the world? What does our calendar look like, right? Do we work with students? Do we do most of our business in the school year to engage with that population? Or do we make most of the summer when people are free and we give them things to do on, Tuesday, Thursday nights, like Chirp in the Park? Then you have the operational underpinning, right? This is what we do to bring the mission and the what to life. You might have a public-facing building. You might have your back office spaces where all the real work gets done. If you're a theater, you have backstage. You have your stage manager, you have your staff, you have your artists, and you have the art itself. Execution. So you have your mission. You know what you're going to do with your mission. You've gotten your ducks in a row to make life out of that. How do you do it? You're a theater, you rehearse, you cast your shows. You're the Guild of Artists, You bring the artwork in-house, you curate, you put nails in the wall, you hang, you market, you come up with a promotional campaign, you might engage with certain print advertising, radio advertising. You have to make an audience aware of what you're doing. There's legal, there's finance, there's accounting, there's all of these hard business things, which I don't think gets talked enough about in the arts. And as someone who is on the business side of art, I think that's so important that you can have a career in any facet in the art space. And they're critical to getting any sort of cultural programming off the ground and running. And then of course, just the logistics. When is this happening? What time of day? Is it, what are your daily hours? Is it an opening party? How do you keep it going and living and breathing? These are all realities from, again, time immemorial, and they have shifted to some degree in the pandemic years, right? I think the past 2 years, and likewise will continue to shift going forward. So I wanted to do a bit of a deep dive on some of Ridgefield's greatest organizations, just to show us how they engaged and grappled with the idea of sustaining mission and strategy, operations, execution, in this sort of necessarily brought to us hybrid world. So right off the bat, you have something like ACT of CT's conservatory program. It went remote in March 2020. That meant engaging, when we think of the operations and the execution, engaging with digital tools to continue the work of their mission, right? To educate, to bring theater to the masses, to teach, to build a new generation of theater lovers and creators. Lounsbury House, key connection point for so many in Ridgefield. They engaged in a drive-through Halloween celebration that brought together the Ridgefield Fire Department, the Ridgefield Theater Barn, the National Charity League, and the Ridgefield Rotary. And again, they embraced a novel methodology, actually not so novel. Sometimes we have to look to the past to bring us forward. Drive-in movies were back all of a sudden, right? We had to dare to go back to go forward. And that was something that was embraced right here in town. Operational underpinning. This was so interesting to see in the early days of the pandemic, where you saw examples of museum staff upskilling, differently skilling members of their staff to keep them employed, to keep them engaged, to keep the organizations running. I heard stories of museum security guards being trained in, sort of easy level HTML so they could do website cleanups, so they could do a filing system just to keep the museum going in times where their typical day-to-day operations had ceased. The Prospector Theater is a great example. They leveraged their popcorn business, their concession business during the pandemic, and their popcorn is now sold in 47 of 50 states in the US, which is pretty amazing. And they embraced this idea of differently skilling their staff. So they went from selling tickets and filling soda, cups at concession to making popcorn and bagging it. And they were able to keep that operation afloat, and it's now a significant part of their revenue stream. They actually diversified their revenue streams in the pandemic with that novel lever. Then you have an organization like Throne Stone. They embraced the outdoor world. Again, a novel methodology. I often think the culinary arts end up in no man's land when we talk about industries. Same thing with outdoor dining, right? They needed to stay afloat. Culinary arts, I think, are very much an art in and of itself, and they embrace the outdoors and methodology to connect their art, their offering, with their patrons. Throne Stone did the same thing. And in 2021, summer 2021, they did a sort of roving model where they went from 3 different Ridgefield organizations and performed their shows outside, embracing strategic partnerships with local organizations. And they were able to bring their programming to Ridgefield that summer by engaging that new methodology. Execution. So again, new strategies and operations were required. It was a necessity in the past couple of years. But now, outdoor and digital programming has really become a reality. The poet laureate, Barb Jettis, this was her hosting a poetry slam in conjunction with the library in 2021's Make Music Day, which is a Ridgefield Arts Council-led initiative. It's a global initiative, June 21st, where cities across the globe engage in this idea of making music. Across venues, across media, drum circles, performances, getting the town to just be activated with music. And likewise with art, with the spoken word, the written word, rhythm. The Aldrich Museum, another great example, outdoor sculpture. Even by having, a pillar, right now they have that great ladder out front, it engages and sparks a conversation in town. And not to say they hadn't been doing this pre-pandemic, but it's certainly a new methodology that is being deployed and will continue to be deployed, because these new methods have allowed these organizations to reach different audiences, to reach new audiences, and I think will become a meaningful part of how we all do business. I also wanted to share one example, which I worked on at Artnet, and this was, forgive me, I want to just bring us here for one moment. So this was an experience we created in April 2021 to highlight a work by Frank Stella that we were selling as part of our premiere sale in the spring season, post-war and contemporary art auction. So Frank Stella, artist who did very varied work, actually that work we just saw from the Aldrich was also a Frank Stella sculpture. This was part of his Polish Village series. The work is about 114 inches by 94 inches, it's huge, it's irregular. It was in Miami, and we were locked down with the pandemic. The seller wanted to sell it, we certainly wanted to sell it as well, and we thought to ourselves, now how are we going to connect this work with buyers across the globe? And we engaged, actually, an architect who has started to grapple with the idea of digital experience and digital reality to help create actually a digital museum experience for us that showed examples of the work, of similar works in the series by the artist, a process overview of how these works were created, a timeline for Frank Stella's life and his process, and ultimately, it can be driven by the user. So you can actually click in here and you can read, that Frank Stella had a show at MoMA in 1987 that was a retrospective looking back from 1970 to 1987. You can continue on in the experience by scrolling at your leisure from home to the work itself. You can click in, you get details, you can see the estimate. You can also place a bid. You can call the specialist on the lot, that's the expert. You can send an email. And these tools became a lifeblood to the art industry. Online viewing rooms, Zoom connections with clients, and this is true across industries as well. These methodologies are absolutely here to stay. Long story short of this work, it was in Miami. We sold it sight unseen, except through this experience, to a buyer in Germany. That's the power of the digital age. And truly, these are methodologies that, based on that experience, we will continue to use. The patrons, all of us, those who consume, who engage, who participate, and who support the arts. What's our life cycle in all of this, and how have we been patrons? How are we now as patrons? I wanted to look at it from this perspective. I think as patrons, we maybe have experienced the hybrid world in more profound ways for a longer period of time. So I looked at different timelines here. And I looked at the patron experience in sort of four key moments. Awareness, meaning awareness of a cultural offering happening, right? This is, I'm now aware that this talk is happening today at the Ridgefield Library. It's being developed into being an audience member. It's also helping a consideration set concretize in my mind that if I have a Sunday afternoon free, what am I going to do with it? I have a few options. I could come to this talk, I could go to the prospector, I could do X, Y, and Z things. Then you have acquisition. I'm aware of something, how do I acquire that something? Am I buying a ticket? Am I carving out time in my schedule? Do I have to drive to get there? The experience itself, again, if I go early, can I get lunch? Or how long is it going to take? Is there an intermission? How do I plan my life around this? What do I wear? Community. If you go to any of these events or you consume any of this culture, am I doing it alone? Am I doing it with others? What's the overall atmosphere, and what's my before and after experience? Now, I do think the digital sort of toolkit we've been discussing has impacted awareness and acquisition for a long time. Again, we talked about this idea of telecharge for Broadway. We've been buying tickets online for years. It's been very convenient. We don't have to travel into New York to go to the box office. We can do it from the convenience of our own home. Acquisition, same thing. We have all been getting digital advertising for a long time. We are made aware of these moments through different methods. The digital world has impacted that world, has certainly continued to do so, but I think awareness and acquisition have benefited from digital tools for a significant period of time. The two biggest changes for us, certainly I think, were experience and community. I mean, I'm curious, show of hands, who before the pandemic attended a cultural event on Zoom or digitally? I'm impressed. Okay, I'm also impressed. And now who, either in the pandemic or post-pandemic, has attended a cultural offering on the internet? That's a sea change, my friend. I mean, that's significant. And likewise, community, how we engage with art, with whom, how it feels to us, how we talk about it, has changed significantly as well. So let's dive into each a little bit further. Awareness and acquisition. I call this the Carnegie Hall model. And I say that lovingly and with slight frustration, because I don't know if you have ever gotten a call from Carnegie Hall right around dinner time trying to sell you whatever series of tickets this season. It's frustrating, but my goodness, is it part of a very effective model that they deploy. So awareness and acquisition, right? This is getting the patron to know that something is happening and ultimately driving them to go to the website, go to the box office, do what they have to do to acquire it. Awareness, marketing, print ads, radio ads, billboards, direct-to-consumer phone calls. Again, I lovingly get those calls from Carnegie Hall, and I'm like, can you call it a different time? But it works. Now I remember Carnegie Hall. Outreach, direct mailers, we get them from our organizations in town. The digital presence we see, these are all methods to help ultimately securing a spot in our consideration sets. So you know that in December you have one weekend free, you want to engage with the holidays in some way. Might you go to the New York Phil's Holiday Brass Concert? Will you go to an opening at Ridgefield Guild of Artists? How will you use that time? You'll go to your consideration set. Who's been top of mind? What did you just read about in the New Yorker in their listings this week? That's sort of how we can make sense of the world. And these organizations use this model so that they are top of our consideration sets. And acquisition. So after all of that, after getting that third call from Carnegie Hall, you know what? Let me go to their website. Let me see what they're offering, right? They've hooked me. I'm now going through their calendar, seeing what looks good, what works for me, and then I'm going to buy a ticket. And you can still do that in any number of ways. You can call the box office, you can go to the box office, you can buy them right online. I don't think much has changed in this model, in that the digital checkout experience has been with us for a significant period of time. Even though I think print ads, they're not what they used to be in terms of maybe effectiveness, they're certainly expensive. Can you get a different reach, a wider reach on the internet? Sure. They're still deployed. And ultimately, they do get us to acquire. But what has changed is the experience. So on the left here is Metropolitan Opera. What an experience. You get dressed up. You're settling in for a 4 or 5 hour night. You'll order your champagne to be ready for you at intermission. That is high culture, right? I mean, this is the creme de la creme. You'll get your opera glasses. Maybe it's a translation needed because the opera's in German that night. That really, what does it mean to go out and engage with culture? That is one example that I think is really interesting. And then on the right, I don't know if any of you attended this virtually, but I did, as did my dear husband. This was Stephen Sondheim's 90th birthday celebration, which was celebrated virtually in April 2020. And my husband and I had just started dating in 2019, and we only had the fortune of attending one Broadway show in person before the world shut down. And I'm a theater lover, again, that's my background. And I said, okay, it's Sondheim's birthday. We're spending the night doing this. And I think back to the times I would go to Broadway and I'd get dressed up and you'd plan the drinks beforehand and the dinner afterwards. And Sondheim's birthday was a bit of a technical disaster. They tried, I think it was an 8 o'clock start time, if you'll remember, 8:30, 8:45, technical difficulties. They had Patti LuPone on the line, Bernadette Peters, Mandy Patinkin, many of whom were in Connecticut, Stephen Schwartz. They couldn't stream it. It was such a fiasco. I'm texting all my friends. My husband went to bed. 11 o'clock rolls around. I think they finally got it going. And the whole time, I'm going to skip ahead quickly, I was glued to the internet. This was when I realized the power of community in the digital age and how much things had changed. Right? So if you ever got an auricular at Carnegie Hall, this is so that you don't disturb your fellow patrons during a show. And actually, I thought this was a fascinating stat. They give out as many auriculas in one season, they could fill 382 performances so that we are silent during a performance. Now, to contrast that with what was happening on the internet during this Sondheim fiasco, I love this tweet. Hell hath no fury, like 100,000 former theater kids who all showed up to this thing early, warmed up and ready to go. And it was true. I mean, it was streaming live on YouTube. You could see the viewer count. It was almost 1 million people. The comments, you would read the first word of a comment, and before you could finish it, the next comment would come. It was raucous. And you know what? It was really enjoyable. It was fun. I mean, you were collectively on this technical fiasco together. At the end of the day, they got the show up and running. And I thought, what was better, the show itself or waiting for it to begin? And I realized in the proscenium stage world of Carnegie Hall and of a pre-technology world, you wouldn't be privy to any of that. God bless the stage managers who would keep all of it under wraps from you, but that's the good stuff. And that is what the digital world allows us to take part in. The comment section. You know, the technical fiascos, watching it at home in your pajamas, right? We're not in ball gowns. I was not in a ball gown waiting for that to happen. I was abandoned by my theater goer. But ultimately, I had 100,000 other former theater kids with me from the solidarity of my living room. And I mean, truly, this is a screenshot from my cell phone. When I was putting this presentation together, I found it because I had taken so many screenshots of hilarious tweets that I had found as we were experiencing that together. And it's one of my favorite pandemic moments, actually, to date. And I think it goes to show that, you know, highs and lows, but are the lows more fun? And do we only get the lows when we are a part of it in that way? Again, to this idea of us as patrons being a much more intricate part of the model. It was fun to be backstage that night. It was a good experience. And now to bring it all home, and to bring it all home in a real way, to Ridgefield. You know, Ridgefield was the place I decided to call home in the pandemic, in the midst of all of this, in the midst of our transition to a much more hybrid world. And it's also the state's first designated cultural district. This was work that was done pre-pandemic. It was designated in 2021, and the town is certainly showing no signs of stopping. So again, in May 2021, Ridgefield received the first designation of cultural district in the state of Connecticut. Here's a quote from Rudy Marconi, our first selectman. "The people of Ridgefield have long appreciated the abundance of arts and culture in our town. We are thrilled that the state also recognizes all that Ridgefield has to offer by giving us the first cultural district designation." Now, I can take absolutely no credit for the cultural district designation. I only have the joy of helping to steward it as it continues to evolve and live and breathe in my work. as a resident of the town, but also as the chair of the Ridgefield Arts Council. And I think it's worth taking a moment to understand and explore this idea of what makes a cultural district, right? It is an actual designation. It's a concept. It's deployed in many other cities across the country, Pittsburgh being one of them, Nashville, Tennessee, Tucson, Arizona. We're in good company. And we're all designated for different reasons. But chiefly, and this is per Americans for the Arts, cultural districts are defined by a set of the following characteristics. And we'll sort of do the greatest hits here. Principally, the town must have a unique, the arts and culture within that designated town must be unique to the character, community, and resources available locally. Now, I've had the fortune of getting to know the 22 nonprofit art and culture organizations in town, and I can tell you that in aggregate, they create a mosaic that is absolutely unique and integral to the community and then the town itself. It's really a beautiful mosaic that they come together to create. They must have a significant economic impact. And again, this idea of the market. I didn't want this presentation to be all about, private art world and we're selling $1 million paintings, this and that. But the economic impact, and we'll dive more into this, is so critical. And it's so critical to Ridgefield, actually. Art and culture, they're not just these qualitative, nice things you do. They are real businesses. And let us not forget that nonprofits are real businesses that drive real economic impact and community impact to its patrons, to its employees, to those it supports. They are real hubs of activity, and in Ridgefield, that is our calling card, my friends. They also help revitalize and increase the quality of life. Again, having an offering put together like this for us, what a joy. It didn't cost us any money to organize this in tax dollars, sure, but we didn't have to spend above and beyond, right? This is a beautiful community benefit to us because of the resource we have here in Ridgefield in terms of our arts and culture. They also help in aggregate to create a focal point for marketing and promotion of the town in and of itself. And certainly, we have a critical mass of organizations in town across industries, performing arts, literary arts, education, even art and culture, and it's an expanded definition. Weir Farm, Woodcock Nature Center. These are all art and culture organizations as well. Culture is bigger than paint on the canvas or a bow on strings. And Ridgefield has been a town that's been bold enough to embrace that. And then again, that focal point, this idea of marketing, it's sort of something, the sum of the parts is bigger than the sum individually. And Ridgefield has recognized that. And ultimately, the town benefits from an economic perspective. So some of the stats you're about to see here were pulled together in my work with the Ridgefield Arts Council and the Economic and Community Development Commission in a recent funding request we had for the art and culture sector in Ridgefield with a set of funds from the American Rescue Plan Association, Act. And we really did a deep dive in how economically and community-driven and impactful art and culture was. And this is from a study that was done in 2017. This same study is actually being redone right now. But all in, it basically tells us that for any person who goes to a town in Fairfield County to attend an art and culture event, they will spend an additional $34 above and beyond the cost of a ticket or that acquisition cost for the art itself when they go to consume that. So if you paid an entrance fee at the Aldridge or you were at the Ridgefield Playhouse, this study will show that above and beyond that ticket price, you'll go to a restaurant, you'll go to a shop, even your parking payments, you name it. On average, an attendee for an art and culture event will spend $34 on top of the cost of attending the event itself. Now, in a pre-pandemic world, what did that add up to in Ridgefield? It's about $37 million in economic activity. They came from about 600,000 attendees to art and culture events in Ridgefield. It's pretty significant. Pretty significant. And again, the study is being redone, so adjusted to the cost of inflation, et cetera, we do expect that $34 to increase when this is redone.
Have you let the Chamber of Commerce to know about these things?
Oh yes, we are. The Arts Council has a close friendship with the Chamber of Commerce. They've been real stalwart supporters of us in this initiative. But it's not just all about the economic impact. It's also about the community impact. We pulled this data as well alongside the economic data when we were working on this request earlier in the year. And just to give you a sampling of the arts organizations at the bottom, this shows the average percentage of audience members, 2018 through 2022 estimated, so end of this year, who actually reside in Ridgefield. So this just goes to show how important these organizations are to the town itself. There's no question that organizations in our town, look at the big ones, I mean, it's just clear examples, the Playhouse, ACT, the Prospector, no question there's some moviegoers from Wilton in there right now, or Norwalk, you name it. But we also take care of those at home. And when we look at the idea of this cultural district, revitalizing our town, increasing the quality of life for those who live here, is a real hallmark of what it means to be a cultural district. And these organizations do this without question in their programming, in their offering, in their physical location. There's a real altruism amongst organizations, partnership, sharing spaces. Look at Throwing Stone, who was able to do a show. They did one at the West Lane Inn as an example. Private-public partnership, right? Private business, partnering with a nonprofit organization. I think that's a really amazing thing. Even the library offering space to the Ridgefield International Film Festival or having art shows. There's a real synergy that happens within these organizations, and that's good for everybody. The art culture world was also a beacon in a reopening Ridgefield. It was not easy. These were organizations that are still saddled with COVID precautions. Many of other industries have shed them, but if you're in equity theater, you still have to deal with these precautions, and they have real dollars and cents impacts, way of operating impacts. I think the Playhouse as well, who had to reschedule a number of performances, and it still is, as COVID continues to be a concern. But truly, art and culture led the path to reopening in Ridgefield, again, through the adoption of novel methodologies that we discussed as we looked to how creators have changed the way they embrace a toolkit, and institutions embrace a toolkit, and patrons. So a few examples. The Ridgefield Symphony Orchestra found synergy in partnering with organizations around town, similar to Throwing Stone. So this is the RSO performing at Keeler Tavern. The Ridgefield International Film Festival in 2021 featured films of resilience. Right? This is the power of content and of strategizing your offering to speak to your patrons in the moment. The Western Connecticut Youth Orchestra were hindered in performances in 2020 and 2021, but last year they did end their season on a high note, again embracing outdoor as a landscape they can now operate within. And it hasn't been perfect. We're learning a lot, we continue to learn, but the impact of digital on audience engagement in Ridgefield has been pronounced, it certainly has been felt, and it did present a life raft as this sector embraced a reopening world. So this is a graph that shows, again, this is polls top of the year, how did the pivot to digital affect audience programming? You'll see 50% said it decreased significantly. That makes sense. Some of these organizations were necessarily in-person organizations, just by a long shot. If you had educational programming after school, sure, you could pivot to digital. You necessarily would lose, a number. There's sort of I don't want to say a leaky bucket effect, but it definitely has. When optionality on the online world is also, it's a blessing and a curse, right? You have options now. It's not the same thing as having to be there at 4 p.m. Maybe something else comes up, or it's easy to enter a Zoom, and it's also easy to not enter the Zoom. And I think that's something we've realized in the digital world, that it does take time to build back engagement. But on the other side of the pie chart, you also see that audience engagement increased. Not only did audience engagement increase, but it expanded. I worked with the Ridgefield Guild of Artists just September on their 45th annual juried exhibition, and there were, from across the country, submissions. And that goes to show the power of the internet. That you can be an artist in Ohio or California, I think there was someone, they submitted an artwork through the internet. So absolutely, a hefty percentage of local artists, but also some from across the country, and that would not have happened without the wider adoption of digital tools. So I think, the digital engagement and reality It's a complement to what we've always done and to how we've done business. We know that the churn rate is higher because, you know, that Stephen Sondheim birthday exhibition, we have an example here. Some people went to bed. They weren't going to wait 2 hours, right? I mean, at some point, you give up. You're like, I'm turning the computer off. So there are definitely blessings and curses to it, but I think net-net, they are tools that we cannot deny. They are important, and they will continue to be important. So where do we go from here? And if you'll indulge me, I'd like to sort of give us a bit of a rallying cry. You know, the show must go on. It has, and it certainly has within Ridgefield, to a really tremendous degree. I think the cultural district designation came at a perfect time because so much of this work was already being done. And certainly, I've likened the pandemic to being, you know, a repeat of tsunamis, and maybe as these waters start to recede, again, I knock on wood, and hopefully recede meaningfully, we are left with a new landscape, and I think Ridgefield is particularly poised to be successful on that landscape. If we, as creators, and who here is a creator in this space? Many of us. If the creators can be bold and brave, you know, your work is critical to the community, to the life cycle, to everything we do. You know, we cannot have art and culture without the art itself. Embrace new tools, try new things, embark on new themes. We need that continual spark to keep going. And to the tastemakers, do we have anyone in the audience who works in the cultural space? Or, you know, I'll put my hand up there. I work in an auction world, so I get to decide who has auction records. Do we have any other tastemakers in the room? Okay. Well, there we go.
Oh, I find wines.
Tastemaker. Absolutely. So we equally need to be bold and brave. Try that new organic wine where you're like, why would I have organic wine? Right? For us, it's take a risk on an artist who might not have a secondary market. It's take a risk in going to see a new show as a patron now that you've never seen before, you thought you wouldn't like. It's daring to sit through a piece of classical music when you prefer rock concerts. It's being bold in what we consume. As arbiters of culture, I think for us, we should all embrace a wider definition of who is an arbiter of culture. Is it just the New York Times bestsellers list? Is it just the white cube, you know, sort of designation that we see from the world? And also realize that with great power comes great responsibility. My favorite quote from Spider-Man, but it's true. As we take on more and more of this life cycle together, we become responsible. And that should not be taken lightly. And to the market, we should be nimble, be flexible, because again, we know we're telling the artists what to do next, in that next step. But also to be unafraid to engage with the market. You know, or don't engage at all. That's one of the beauties of the digital world. You can consume, but you don't have to buy. I mean, there are different metrics of success that the institutions benefit from, that the artist benefits from. Follower count can be, I don't want to say as helpful, but it is helpful to an artist, like an artwork sale is. Even engaging with them, sending them a message, hey, I really like that work you just posted. That has value. And I think we should remember that the market doesn't just mean putting dollars into it or taking dollars out of it. It means putting ourselves into it and engaging. And the digital world has given us a platform to do that, to engage in a way that is more multifaceted, multi-dimensional, highly, widely definitional. I think it's continually growing. And I think now we all sit in all of these buckets. I think the artists are the tastemakers, are the patrons, are the arbiters, are the market themselves, and vice versa. And that's an exciting place to be. Maybe overwhelming at times. Doesn't mean you all have to go out and mint an NFT right now, but to be aware of these things that are happening and to acknowledge that we're part of a continuum, one that has been with us forever, and the tools change and the art categories change, and we go from oil to tempera to watercolor to NFTs. But it's an exciting world to be a part of. And thank you all for letting me chat about it. So with that, we've covered a lot of ground.
it's more a comment than a question, you know, the old adage, there's nothing new under the sun, right?
Sure.
Your continuum circle, I mean, you brought up the Medicis. They fit every one of those
Absolutely.
circles. And I'm sure there are many examples before that. So
Absolutely.
there's nothing new under the sun.
Correct.
Yeah.
I think it's just new, it's new to us, right? I mean, this is our first go around this planet. How we experience things is new, but undoubtedly, people have been here before, in different ways, called by different names, grappling with different things, but ultimately, oh yeah, I mean, these are...
Just the media that's changed.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
You had a question?
Yeah, I have a question. Well, first of all, welcome to Ridgefield.
Thank you,
Yeah.
thank you.
You know, it's such an amazing presentation, and I just wish more people knew about this to come here. When I pulled in, I couldn't even find a single parking space. I thought everybody were here.
I know. Same, sadly, I don't think we can compete with the prospectors in any of that.
So, you mentioned you started your career in the performing arts vocal. I wish my daughter was here, you know, listening to this and get to know it, because she's manager of digital marketing for this East Village theater chain called La Mama.
Oh, sure, I know it.
Theater chain. So where do you see the application of these things to the, maybe it's off topic, to the performing arts world, the vocal, the stage, and all that? Do you see?
To the artists themselves or to the institutions?
Industries.
It's a great question. I mean, I think the performing art world was one of the quickest to adopt the digital, actually, when the pandemic started. I mean, look at the Sondheim example. That was April 26th. That was 5 weeks post-lockdown. I can tell you in the fine arts space, the galleries shuttered, the auction houses shuttered, museums were well poised enough because they had digital landscapes already. But really, galleries did not start to transact until June 2020, when they would start sending around PDFs of artworks. Meanwhile, if you could get a camera, I mean, look at Pam Jones at Theater Barn. She would go in there with a camera. It was safe if she was by herself, but she brought programming to the world. You had a stage. A camera was all you needed, and I think, given their medium, they have soundboards. They already were a little maybe more savvy where AV is concerned. Another great example, though, look what Hamilton did. Hamilton was meant to be released in 2021 to theaters. They streamed instead on Disney Plus on July 3rd, 2020. That was significant, right? That was the hottest ticket in Broadway for how long? Ticket prices were hundreds and hundreds of dollars. And they made a decision to say, you know what? The world has changed so drastically. People need something right now. Of course, for Disney Plus, it was great. How many people signed up for the subscription service simply to stream Hamilton? That they brought content to the masses, theater to the masses, in a way that had a different barrier to entry, that spoke to the digital reality we were in right now. And it was a rave success. I mean, I look at my stepdaughter front row, has not seen Hamilton in person, but knows every word to a handful of songs because of that streaming decision. So I think the theater world has been particularly adaptable. I will also say that where they go from here is tough. I mean, look at the theaters. Especially in New York, they're old. The seats are very close together. The ticket prices are very expensive nowadays, more so than they were pre-pandemic. Whether they're trying to recoup losses or the cost of doing business, because they still have equity precautions to be mindful of. Testing is expensive. The casting needs are expensive. If someone gets COVID and needs to be out, you need understudies for understudies. So their in-person operation maybe continues to be impacted in ways that other industries aren't. But I think what they have done for digital has been good. Mm-hmm. I mean, look, if you can make a theater lover out of someone from afar, that's a good thing. And that was a hard thing to do. I think if you went to certain shows in the city, there was less representation from the younger generation. I think that's fair to say. And now I think you have a new generation that grew up on streaming Hamilton in the pandemic. And that will do good things for the industry at large.
Well, you're welcome to bring your family back to the Ramada. They just opened their new theater.
Yeah, that's great.
And a lot of support from Ridgefield
That's great.
residents, including Mr. Firestring. is
Oh,
also one of the big
wonderful.
supporters.
I just want to mention
Yeah.
also that this is being recorded.
It's great.
We'd rather wanted to see this.
Perfect.
Thank you for
I like
that,
that.
It'll be on the library's YouTube channel.
Thank you.
That's great. Question in the back?
Yes, well, first I'd like to compliment you on the lovely, lovely presentation.
Oh, thank you.
And you covered so many fascinating grounds on this with your presentation, referring also to the pandemic and the outbreak. Here's a living momentum, because as an artist, I was invited to be part of the Clio Art Fair, and it ran from March 5th rather, through the 8th. And 2 days after the show opened, Governor Cuomo made the announcement that there was
Exactly.
yeah, so that would be about March 7th.
Right.
And then on the Sunday, that was a Saturday. And then on the Sunday, this was the 8th, the show closed. But there was so much excitement. We didn't think there was a pandemic or anything.
Exactly.
Everybody who attended, no one came down with anything.
That's amazing.
And they were hugging and kissing, and
Right.
it was so amazing. But, yeah.
Absolutely. It's funny you say that because at the same time in New York was the Armory Show, a huge art fair.
Yes, it
Right?
was.
And I
that's right.
remember at that point, people were shaking elbows, and half of the attendees were laughing about it, and the other half were taking it very seriously.
Yeah.
And at one point, I looked around and I said, I don't know if I should be here right now. I mean, it started to feel like a hot box.
Yeah, you're right.
But yeah, I mean, there were, and think about being in an institution in those times, making those calls. That was
Yeah.
hard.
Nobody took it seriously.
That was hard, exactly,
You're right.
exactly.
But it was quite fascinating, and it
Indeed.
affected so many things after that.
Absolutely. Question here?
I just recently went to see the Beyond Van Gogh
Oh,
show
sure,
in
sure.
Harvard, and for a long time I kind of poo-pooed it because I thought, like,
Right.
how could this be great? But it really was fantastic, and it's a great way to see the marriage of technology
Absolutely.
and traditional art, and so many people enjoying the work in a different format. So it was really
Thank
incredible.
you for bringing that up. That's a really interesting part of the market that I did not touch on. I'm grateful you brought it up. So these immersive experiences, Van Gogh, there's a Klimt one. You might have even heard of Yayoi Kusama's Infinity Rooms. Little different because those are the actual artworks brought in, but same idea, immersive. Great for Instagram, great for content, but it's not a bad thing. Think about the logistics it requires to launch a Van Gogh exhibition.
Sure.
Shipping the artworks, before you even ship the artworks, loan agreements. I was just in London at the National Gallery, and they had an amazing Winslow Homer exhibition.
Wow.
And I was in awe of the artwork. He's an American painter, he's a fantastic artist. My husband can attest to this. I was more in awe of where they got the artworks from. The Philadelphia Art Museum, the Barnes Collection, the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston. You name it, they physically brought these artworks together. These are massive logistical undertakings that museums go through. And when you're talking priceless works of art like Van Gogh, the insurance you would require, the security it would require, the timing, getting everyone to agree to these things. So digital and projecting Van Gogh's works on walls, his works, especially if you've seen any of the movies that have recently been made about his artwork, so amenable to animation. I haven't seen it myself, but I imagine it sort of lives and breathes because so do his paintings. Again, they are commercial enterprises. Let's not hide that. There are ticket prices. Someone is making money off of them and doing well. They're popping up in cities all over. But they're also making audiences out of those who otherwise might not ever go see Starry, Starry Night or his Sunflowers. And I think that's a good thing. You're seeing them pop up with more frequency. Again, Klimt now has one. His artwork's equally amenable to this sort of immersive experience. And we laugh, you go to these museums, yes, you see people taking a picture of the Rembrandt with their phone. Are they even looking at it, or are they looking through their iPhone? Well, you might have an opinion, but does it matter? They're engaging. Let them put it on Instagram. That means someone else is seeing the Rembrandt,
Yeah.
right? It's this network effect. And say what you will about the digital age, but if it gets to someone to consume, I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, but that's exactly, I'm sorry for interrupting.
Yeah.
That's exactly like Disney created Epcot, where you have a 7/8 scale Tokyo or
Sure.
Delhi. And the question is, once you've bought your hot dog in Tokyo with an American dollar,
Yeah.
have you been to Tokyo? You know?
Yeah, it's a good question.
Yeah.
It's a good question.
Yeah.
Question in the back?
I just wanted to make a comment. I just had, this past week, a really cool digital experience. I watched the Christie's auction of
Yes.
Paul Allen.
Visionary stuff, absolutely.
Oh my gosh, it was incredible. It was done through their Facebook page.
Yeah,
And just to watch those blockbuster
absolutely.
paintings go and the auctioneer in the room, I mean, it
Yes.
was electric, so.
Totally, and you know, another great example, thank you. I used to work those auctions. They are ticketed. So pre-pandemic, they were hot items in town, but you certainly could not get in. I mean, I would have friends asking me to get in, and I can't get you in. I mean, these are ticketed events. Now, the production value, this is a toolkit that started out with like chewing gum and popsicle sticks at their first major stream sales in the fall of 2020. They were so terrible. I mean, they were grainy quality, and the way they did it, because they couldn't have their specialists or their auctioneers travel, they would go between Hong Kong, Paris, and New York with a sort of roving auctioneer. They were a disaster. Then they brought in experts. So they added to their toolkit and they brought in production teams. And now they are beautiful, pristine production quality events that let you into this rarefied world, right, where you're seeing, I mean, and the Paul Allen collection was an encyclopedic, I mean, beyond museum quality. Beyond museum quality, Georgia O'Keeffe, Van Gogh, Matisse, Cézanne, you name it. Ticketed event, closed to the world, only at their Rockefeller Center location, is now open for the masses. It's another great example, thank you for sharing that.
And does that keep on going? Like, could I get it now? 'Cause I
I'm
missed it.
sure they have a recording, I'm sure they have a
That's
recording.
benefit.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
they live on for posterity,
Yeah.
that's true. I mean, in the auction world, and I have so many old catalogs where you would write down the hammer price. Because unless you have a subscription to the Artnet price database, which is the company I now have, the hammer prices, they're secret. So unless you're in the sale room recording them, they were these sort of transient things. But now everything is recorded, and transparency, that's another thing we didn't talk about. The digital world has bred transparency. It lives on. I mean, the younger generation will call them receipts. You know, every tweet, someone has taken a screenshot of, and if you try to bury it, oh, it will come back. I mean, I was taking screenshots of the Sondheim thing. So there is a digital fossil for every moment, no question. And I think that's a good thing. It gives others an opportunity to engage. In the art market, it breeds price transparency. You should know what these things traded for. It helps you make an informed decision. If you have one, if you want to engage in any way, transparency is a good thing for the market. Sure.
Somebody mentioned the Van Gogh. With the easier access now to the market, to the patrons, to the money from a creator's point of view, do you think this will further enhance the quality of the work, or it will actually affect the quality of the work? Because after all, Van Gogh only sold one painting.
Yeah.
And if he had access to money like this, then would he still be able to?
It's a really good question. I think in that question, Instagram is the best example we can look to for answers. Instagram has allowed, it's a digital storefront. It's image-led. So if you are, and really if you're any sort of artist, you can post, even Spotify, I mean, you can stream your own music. You can self-publish a book. You can show your artwork online. It has a built-in community channel, direct message. You can message these people easily. You don't need to schedule that time and plan the travel to go to their studio, right? Or secure time to go meet them somewhere. It's as simple as a message. It's basically sending an email without having their email address if they're public. I think it's a great connector, and there's so much that can be leveraged without doing any sort of paid promotion. The hashtag, whatever engineer came up with the hashtag, genius, because it aggregates. So if you are an artist and you, under your posting, you say hashtag contemporary art, hashtag Ridgefield artist, hashtag Connecticut, your post becomes available under all of those hashtags. So now it's surfaceable, or it has been surfaced to anyone looking at those hashtags, right? So it allows a networking effect that doesn't necessarily take payment, for paid promotion above and beyond the cost of your cell phone and charging your cell phone and your Wi-Fi connection. It really has given a toolkit where otherwise they were ring-fenced expertises. I mean, you engage a marketing team, engage a gallerist, engage a recording artist to record yourselves. Meanwhile, you can do a pretty good recording if you were a singer. You could download an app, you could do it on your cell phone directly. You have access to tools now that you used to have to pay for or get access to. So I think it actually will, I think it has, I know it has. I know people who sell things on Instagram all the time. Likewise, the quality of art, I know people who will ask for commissions over Instagram. Commissions, you know, and artists, I'm sure, have their own opinions. They can encourage you to try something new. Maybe you've only worked in oils, but someone really wants a charcoal drawing, and before you know it, you're experimenting with a new medium. I think they can push an artist to try, to experiment, to engage in a different skill that they might not otherwise do as easily. So I think it's probably a good thing. Now, of course, selling out, what is selling out in this digital age? I don't know, and is it such a bad thing? Again, the markets are fickle. Look at NFTs. I mean, it was like, you know, they say when really young kids play soccer and they don't really realize what team they're playing for, they all just follow the ball up and down the field. That's sort of what was happening there. There was a lot of money to be made quickly. The art sort of followed trends and followed what was trading. If you're in it for investment, that's a dangerous game to play. If you're creating art for the fun of it and one day you're doing this and the next day you're doing that, go for it. I think it only gets dangerous when you're putting something on the line for it in these fickle markets. That does bring us to time. But it has been a pleasure chatting with you this afternoon. Thank you so much for your time and your questions. I'll be around if anyone else wants to ask me anything, but really a pleasure. Thank you all so much for being here.